We appreciate you for coming on, Noah. I want to talk about Ohio State because Indiana, number 23, Indiana went to number 2 Ohio State this weekend. This weekend, they will take on Maryland for kind of a bounce-back opportunity because they were shut out 45-0 against Ohio State. Obviously, not a whole lot of competitiveness. I shouldn't say that, but definitely a match that certainly was decided very early on between these two, even though there was obviously a great deal of competition within it. So overall thoughts on IU Ohio State, what kind of were your takeaways from that match as you were watching it last weekend?
Yeah, this was a dual meet where I was warned going into the season, because this is the first college wrestling season that I've been invested in. I was warned going into it that you realize very quickly that the top of the wrestling world is just in a whole different league than the rest of the nation. So these Penn States, these Iowas, these Iowa States, Oklahoma States, Ohio States are just really in a whole different category. And the Hoosiers have had a really strong season so far, and they're going to get to play these kind of teams again, like a Nebraska or a Penn State. But they really got punched in the mouth and got a taste of what the elite wrestling schools really feels like.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the depth of the Buckeyes and other teams like that really shined through. It was almost depressing as someone who, obviously I'm sort of covering IU wrestling from a neutral standpoint, but still they're there's kind of a natural affinity for the players and the teams, the wrestlers and the teams that you kind of pick up. So, watching, for example, Jacob Moran just be dominated. I believe it was a major decision or a technical fall with him. Joey Butler was another one that I love watching, just dominated. And so it was difficult to see that, but obviously a situation where this is the first test Indiana's had against obviously at the first Big Ten test, and certainly of a team of this caliber way at the very top, like you mentioned. So it'd be interesting to see how they respond and sort of develop as we go forward. But even the ranked wrestlers for IU were losing to unranked Buckeyes, and it just shows kind of the depth and the breadth of excellence that they kind of have over there.
The only unranked Buckeye who competed was Ethan Burden, who was matched up with Tyler Lillard, who's number 20th overall, and that was still a 2-1 win for the Buckeyes. So the 1 out of 10 from Ohio State who wasn't in that top 33 was still able to pretty handily at least keep Lillard at bay offensively. But I want to talk about what you were just saying with the Moran bout in the 125. And that was really what set the tone for me watching it. Was like you mentioned, you don't want to be a homer in this industry, but you get to know these guys, and they're the ones that you're watching, the ones that you're interviewing. And Jacob Moran, who was previously undefeated, loses 11-2 in a major decision way. And that really, like I said, sets the tone for the rest of the afternoon, where those first 5 bouts for Ohio State were a major decision, 2 technical falls, a fall, and then another major decision.
Yeah, absolutely. And great point there with obviously undefeated, number 12 at the time. I believe he's still number 12, or at least in that area, after obviously losing this way. I'd have to check the rankings. But
yeah, he's 12 currently.
Okay, that's great to know. I noticed that a lot of times, and I like this about wrestling, where if you lose a match you're supposed to lose, you don't really drop, which I kind of appreciate because, I feel like it's more accurate that way, whereas in sports like football or basketball, you're almost punished for your record even if you're losing to teams. And obviously there's merits to both. But, absolutely. With Moran and absolutely with sort of the rest of the beginning of that match, where it became very clear that it was going to be difficult for Indiana to score. My favorite match, and kind of the match that I consider to be the most noteworthy one, personally was, as we mentioned earlier, number 20, Tyler Lillard, losing to Ethan Burden 2-1. For those that didn't watch it, this is redshirt freshman Ethan Burden, who just was named Big Ten Freshman of the Week, I believe today, which is just cool, and obviously it's because of this result. And especially for a freshman against number 20, Tyler Lillard, who, by my estimation, had sort of the size and length and athleticism advantage in this situation. Burden, very smart, very aware. They both score escapes in the second and third period, so, they do their due diligence and get those points. The only difference in this match, and the only other score in this match, was effectively a stall call kind of baited out by Burden at the boundary, where he's driving Lillard to the boundary. And then as they're both kind of falling out, and it's in some ways a mutually agreed upon situation where they're just going to fall out of bounds, Burden effectively stops at the line, and Lillard's, momentum kind of falls out of bounds, and it ends up being a stall call because you can tell that he kind of was hoping to go that way. And just unbelievable in the moment. You could see some kind of visible frustration from Lillard, where he was like, I can't believe that. Like, that's probably doesn't happen very often to him in his wrestling life. And to see the redshirt freshman Burden kind of put together that moment, and obviously, stay in the lead for the rest of that match, because Lillard almost had a takedown at the very end right there. It was impressive, and I really liked it. And Burden now for me is my favorite non-IU wrestler. I don't watch very much wrestling outside of IU, so to see Burden perform this way, it was fun, it was interesting, and that to me is the most noteworthy match, just because Burden was it's my type of wrestling, the intelligence, the body awareness. I'm more pleased by that than I am by physical brute strength in some ways. And even though I love Tyler Lillard, I think Burden's win here was super impressive, and I really enjoyed watching that one.
Yeah, the Ethan Burden one for me was a excellent example of how important your game planning is at this level of wrestling, where you're going up against a highly ranked opponent in Tyler Lillard, a near perfect record on the season. He's been that pivotal guy for the Hoosiers, being that first matchup out of halftime. And Burden played very defensive. He wrestled very defensively the entire time, which was what ended up getting him the victory. I mean, you look at what Lillard has done as of recent. He's getting he's 2 falls on the season. Besides that one loss to number 6th ranked wrestler when they went to Little Rock, a major decision victory, a couple overtime victories. He's a guy that has relied heavily on his offense and his ability to just overpower you. But Burden was able to kind of tone that back for Lillard and make him work for it, and he only got 1 point out of it. And so the defense really shined in this matchup, and being the only unranked guy on your lineup is a little bit intimidating for a guy like Ethan Burden, a freshman like you mentioned, but he was able to hang with a guy who was, to a lot of people, competing for a national championship.
Absolutely. It'll be fun to watch Burden, especially if he stays at Ohio State, just kind of throughout the rest of his college career. I can't imagine he wouldn't stay.
There's no reason to leave Ohio State if you're wrestling.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly. Best you can kind of be at there. So it'll be interesting to watch him throughout the rest of the season, as well as we potentially get to Big Ten championships and beyond. But between Moran and between Lillard and Burden, and obviously sort of the rest of the competition throughout the day, obviously Ohio State had some big wins. Indiana was close in a few matches. Lillard was an example, probably the closest to winning, just because he add 15 more seconds to the third period and Lillard has a takedown, more than likely, on Burden there in that situation. But nonetheless, very exciting wrestling against Ohio State. Lots to learn from Indiana, especially some of those undefeated wrestlers that were facing their first superior competition situation. And they'll have sort of a bounce-back opportunity against Maryland this weekend. They will play that team at home. Maryland is a team that is 0-2 in Big Ten play so far. And what stuck out to me about Maryland is last weekend and this coming weekend. This doesn't happen very often in the Big Ten schedule, maybe once or twice, where you'll play on a Friday and then on a Sunday. They get that 2 weekends in a row. So they'll play, I don't know exactly, maybe 4 matches in 12 days, something along those lines, between the Friday and Sunday of both weeks. So a lot of wrestling early on for Maryland. They're a little bit banged up. They're a little bit injured. But I'll ask Noah, what are your thoughts on this matchup between IU and Maryland going into it on Sunday?
Yeah, this Maryland matchup for the Hoosiers is kind of a best-case scenario. When you're coming off a humbling loss to Ohio State, and then up next is Penn State, who is pretty much the same beast as the Buckeyes. But this weekend, you get an opportunity to bounce back and to save your record a little bit and to regroup before that Nittany Lions squad, where you're going up against who I would say is the coldest team in the Big Ten right now. Maryland's sitting at 4-3, 3 straight losses, all to solid teams. I mean, number 16 Pitt and number 18 Wisconsin, and then a road loss to Northwestern. They get Purdue on Friday night. But they are so cold right now. And you don't want to call it a must-win for the Hoosiers, but it's an opportunity where you don't want to end up losing 3 in a row, because Ohio State did not go the way you expected it to. If you can't beat Maryland, you're not going to beat Penn State, and that's a 3-week skid for the Hoosiers.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting because obviously Indiana has the advantage as a team. There's still some pretty highly ranked wrestlers on the Maryland side. You look at Braxton Brown, you look at Branton John. Right. We'll see how many of them end up in the lineup. And obviously it gets tricky when if you see a match that's completely out of hand, sometimes you see some younger guys come in at some of the heavier weight classes. But nonetheless, this will be definitely as much of a tune-up as you could have at this point of the season. And you're right. Like, if you have Ohio State and Penn State back-to-back weekends, that's obviously a real rough stretch. And this Maryland opportunity, a great opportunity to bounce back and build some momentum there. 2 straight 2-match weekends for the Terrapins. IU much higher ranked, definitely a prime opportunity. There's still some great matchups. We're going to talk about kind of the most noteworthy match and the match that we're most excited about in a moment, but just to preview kind of all of them in case we don't get to them. At 197, you got number 13, Gabe Sollers versus number 15, Branson John, most likely. Joey Butler, who is fun to watch, I'm sure you would agree, possibly against number 7, Carter Young. And then at 184, you got number 5, Jackson Smith versus number 14, Sam Goen. So there's still plenty of ranked wrestlers, obviously, on the Indiana side, particularly on the heavier side. There's plenty of ranked wrestlers over there. And then for Maryland, certainly a few that are in contention to be in position to compete for national championships, Big Ten championship, things like that, if they continue trending in the right direction. So I'm interested to see if we have the same one here. I want to ask you what your most noteworthy match is, the match you're most excited to see. And, we'll see if we end up with the same one.
I would bet that we have the same one. I feel like this is a bit of a gimme. It's going to be the 197 between Gabe Sollers and Branson John. I mean, it's two guys who are ranked right next to each other in the most recent Intermat rankings, and guys that are coming off of pretty strong performances. I almost said coming off of wins, but if it wasn't for number 13 Luke Giug of the Ohio State Buckeyes, that'd be the case for Gabe Sollers. But he put up what I would have described as the best effort for the Hoosiers at that dual meet against Ohio State, losing 7-5 against the 13th ranked wrestler, putting up some points against really good competition. He's going up against a guy who is at that exact same level this weekend. Branson John coming off a win over number 28 Wyan Ingham in their last dual meet. And so these are two guys that are on the same trail right now. They are right next to each other ranked, and it being a very late bout as well, I think it's going to be one of the most exciting and potentially pivotal ones, assuming that Indiana doesn't jump off to the lead that we expect them to.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I do have the same one, Gabe Sollers, yep. Branson John. You make a good point. Giog, obviously, number 10, was able to put together a 7-5 regular decision victory. At least for me, the Big Ten Plus broadcast cut to technical difficulties in the middle of, I guess it would be the 184 match. So I saw the score, obviously. I kind of know what happened, reading your recaps, things like that. But I kind of have no idea how it went in terms of, aesthetically and visually. But nonetheless, to lose close to number 10, someone ranked higher than you, obviously a big deal. Number 15, Branson John, and a possibility for Sollers to pick up a big win and prove himself. And that's going to come into play in a segment a little bit later in this episode, which is a little bit of a spoiler for you, maybe not so much the viewers. But nonetheless, for Sollers, we kind of don't know what we have with him. We haven't seen him wrestle very many. I believe Giog is the only wrestler in the country that Sollers has been against that is ranked above him. So we don't really know what Sollers' ceiling is, I guess is my point. Branson John doesn't fit that category. He's number 15, but still a great opportunity for him to prove himself. And I agree that you make a good point. Probably a gimme situation. I just wondered if you had there was a specific wrestler you were partial to. It's something about Tyler Lillard for me that I just enjoy watching him. Nonetheless, that certainly would be the best match or the most exciting, most noteworthy match. If you were just to watch one of the 10, Gabe Sollers and Branson John, number 13 and number 15 at 197, is a great pick, according to both of us. And then I wanted to pose this question as well, because there's some good wrestlers on both sides, mainly Indiana, but again, Maryland has some very highly ranked guys. And so I was curious what your thoughts were on the most likely upset for either side. If you're going to see a high-ranked guy go down, who could it be most likely in this match between Indiana and Maryland?
I have two answers, and it's one that would favor each side. And this is a dual meet in which there are not a whole lot of ranked matchups that we're going to see. I believe only two ranked matchups. I'm projecting that we're going to see how the lineups end up. But I think the 184 of Goen and Smith and the 197 of Sollers and John are going to be the only two ranked matchups that we see. Besides that, probably about 6 of the other bouts are going to feature one ranked and one unranked opponent. And so I believe that the two most likely are going to be that 149, where you're going to get an unranked Joey Butler going up against number 7 Carter Young. I think this is a big opportunity for Butler. He's been a guy that, watching him, it almost surprises me that he's not ranked. And looking back at the stats, you don't realize that he even loses bouts sometimes. He performs at a very high level, 4-3 in his dual matchups with 3 major decisions and 2 pins. So when he wins, it is in spectacular fashion to go along with that 8-6 overall record that's between duels and with tournaments. He's going up against a Carter Young who is number 7 in the nation, but he's not winning by a whole lot. His past 2 matchups, when they were in Wisconsin, he was only won 11-6, and then that Northwestern meet, his bout was a 5-1 victory. And so Carter Young isn't a guy who has impressed me so far, and his ranking is so high that I think he could be an upset watch against Joey Butler. The other one I haven't scouted as much as I would have liked, because this was kind of a last-second addition, but it's number 25 Henry Porter going down to an unranked Ryan Kennedy.
Okay, yeah, Butler would certainly be fun. He's another one I really quite enjoyed. This is fun because I don't have the same. Neither of those are the match that I ended up picking. But you make a good point about Butler. Is someone that loves the scramble. He's someone that in tricky, kind of outrageous positions, Butler often finds himself comfortable and finds himself with an advantage, which can be very, very fun. And we'll have to see how that works against Carter Young. And obviously, as you mentioned, it may not be number 7 Carter Young. I forget off the top of my head who the other wrestler on the probable list it is, but we'll see who ends up, stepping onto the mat for Maryland in that situation. For me, you could see this as maybe cheating. It is still an upset and a significant enough of one where I felt justified picking it, but I picked the winner to be a rather highly ranked wrestler in his own right. I'll take number 14, Sam Goen for Indiana, over number 5, Jackson Smith. I'll admit I haven't watched Jackson Smith yet this season, but this is kind of from what I understand and what I've kind of seen in bits and pieces. This is a contrast in styles match. Goen, a little bit of a bruiser, right? Kind of a muscle guy in situations like these, whereas Smith is a little bit more slick on his feet, a little bit more elusive, and so in a situation like this, where they're both highly ranked, they both obviously are, potentially stepping into a situation where they can have some varying levels of performances. You look at Goen, who against Ohio State was just basically out-bruised, is the way I wrote it down, against number 6 Fishback for Ohio State, and he's in a situation where it's similar styles, right? They both approach matches with a great deal of brute force, I suppose you could say. They're both trying to become the stronger and more dominant wrestler that way, and they both approach it the same way. And Fishback simply won, and it was a dominant victory for Fishback in that way. Go in against someone who has a different style, someone who's higher ranked than him, kind of in a similar range at number 5. Could be a situation where Goen steps onto the mat and gains an advantage early and is able to accumulate riding time. And the way I'm thinking about it in my head is Smith is elusive and he's quick on his feet, but if Goen can catch him, if he can catch him in that sort of proverbial net, I think there's a good chance of Goen keeping this one low scoring and kind of eking out a win that way, whether it's 7-3 or whatever, something along those lines, where if Goen can get on top early in periods, I think there's an opportunity for, again, this match to be low scoring and for Goen to win that way, just by almost like in football when you are up by 7, when you're up by 3 and you're running the ball in the fourth quarter and you're just running out the clock, kind of like that for Goen. Lots of riding time, lots of strength, lots of dominance on top. That's how I'm going to predict this one to go if there were to be an upset. Obviously, upset's not a very frequent occurrence in wrestling, but if there's going to be one in this match, that's the one I chose, although I give you credit for picking, I would say, a better one, because any unranked wrestler over top 10 wrestler is obviously much more entertaining and fun and interesting. And so it'll be interesting to see if that actually happens with Butler, because obviously he is a very strong wrestler in his own right.
I think that 184, like you were talking about, is going to be very similar to what we saw in the Ohio State meet with Burden and Lillard, where it's going to come down to who prepares better for who they believe they will be facing. Where two guys, like you said, with very different styles and how they compete, it's the measure of who comes out on top is going to be who is better prepared to take on that alternate style.
Absolutely. And what's nice about that too is, when it's someone with a different style, there's you can kind of, I suppose, learn maybe the deficiencies or the weaknesses in what they do. We kind of saw with Butler, he lost by fall against Ohio State, and it was two wrestlers that both loved the scramble, right? They were both very, they were comfortable in that situation. So for Butler, many times he can just face a wrestler with a different sort of approach, with a different style, and he can force them into uncomfortable positions and ridiculous neutral situations and then come out the better of it. But there's a little bit of a hesitancy when you know that the wrestler on the other side kind of approaches and sees the match the same exact way. And so even for Goen, there's an understanding that, when Fishback if Fishback is out muscling Goen, that's kind of all there is to it, and then ended up being what happened against Ohio State.
You can only game plan so much when the other guy is that much stronger than you.
Yeah, exactly. And also when you understand that what your goals are, what you want to do in a match is the same as the opponent. And that kind of goes back to the Butler idea where you both want to be in the same place, and sometimes you know that the other person is better, or you know that you're better, or you have no idea, and there's that hesitancy, and you don't really want to risk it, and ultimately Butler worked himself into disadvantageous situations and obviously lost pretty quickly in that one. So I think it'll be interesting to see how that contrast in styles goes. If number 14, from a strength perspective, is going to knock down number 5 of kind of a speed and quickness and versatility perspective. And so kind of a fun question to close this out. We talked about Ohio State. We talked about Maryland. I want to focus just on IU. And obviously, Penn State exists, Ohio State exists, but there are, individual championships to be won at each of these weight classes. And if someone at IU is going to win a wrestling national championship this season, if I come back from a few months in the future and say one of these IU wrestlers won a national championship, who would you say it is?
I think I'm going to surprise you a little bit with this one, and it is going to be Derek Gilcher is my national champion. Currently the 31st ranked, and when I saw that you were going to ask me this question, my preparation was almost entirely based on how the Hoosiers did against Ohio State. And just looking at Gilcher's performance, going up against number 4 ranked Carson Charkla, Gilcher losing 11-7 to a top 5 opponent on the road doesn't give me the confidence that he is, a shoo-in to win the entire national championship for his class. But it does give me confidence that he can hang with this kind of competition. And so there isn't anybody on this Indiana team that stands out to me and that I'm expecting to come out as a champion. But the way that Gilcher performed against Charkra on last week against Ohio State, he really surprised me and made me optimistic about his chance to compete with other top 5 opponents.
Absolutely. And that's a fun one because that's relatively a long shot. I think he's at number 31 or something like
31.
that. So obviously well within range to obviously make the NCAA tournament and then from there potentially make a run. So, yeah, definitely a great point right there. On a close loss to somebody that obviously is certainly in contention to a national championship. I kind of had similar thinking. I did not pick Gilcher. I picked number 13, Gabe Sollers, at 197. Kind of similar thinking, kind of a similar idea where he lost 7-5 to number 10, Luke Geog. Obviously very close. Obviously one where, and maybe that just justifies his ranking because I suppose if you're number 13 and you lose to number 10, who's only slightly ahead of you by a slight margin, 7-5, maybe it just indicates that he's number 13. But again, we don't really know what his ceiling is. I think that if he, continues to improve throughout the season, he probably is in position to surpass Geog. Obviously, that doesn't mean anything because Geog is just going to improve throughout the season, most likely too. But nonetheless, it'll be interesting to see how the rest of the season goes for Sollers. It was tricky because there were a few wrestlers that I really liked, and then I looked at the rankings in their weight class, and Mitchell Mesenbrink's there, and it's
right.
or someone else like that, and you kind of have an understanding of the landscape that they're wrestling in. But Sollers I liked. I felt like his weight class was workable, and I felt like we didn't really know where he was at. And so it'll be interesting to see him against Penn State. I don't remember who the starter at Penn State at 197 is off the top of my head, and obviously Nebraska and moving forward from there. But this is nice. We got some variation in some of these questions right here. I was a little bit worried that we were going to go the same way, but I like the variety.
I really wanted to say Jacob Moran, for the last question, but just did not keep it close enough against Ohio State. And he might be my second take, where if he shows improvements, if he makes those adjustments, he can still compete with those top 5, top 10 teams. But really wanted to include him, but he just couldn't make the cut after losing 11-2 to Buzakis.
Yeah, absolutely. So either way, we're going to have a fun match against Maryland in a couple days. We're going to have a fun season the rest of the way. Noah, before we get out of here, you mentioned it a little bit at the beginning, but let the people know where they can find your stuff, where they can find your work, what you're doing, and how the people can see it.
Yeah, all of my wrestling reporting is for the Indiana Daily Student, so you can find that online, Indiana Daily Student. Search for Noah Boudouris. I would also recommend finding me on X, just at Noah Boudouris, all lowercase, no periods, no underscores. And there's a link tree in there. Everything else is in there. I also do WIUX basketball. I have a podcast about NHL hockey. So lots of ways to find me. Lots of work to find.
Absolutely. It's a great time, this sports media life right here, and we will continue enjoying it the rest of the way. I'll be on the call. I'll be color commentator, rather, alongside my guy Quincy Bell and Mary-Kate Sullivan on Big Ten Plus for this wrestling match against Maryland on Sunday. I can't remember if it's at 12 or 2. We'll have to check my calendar before that day comes. You said you think it's at 1?
The Maryland one?
Yes.
Yeah, it's at 1.
Okay, all right. So I wasn't right on either of them. But nonetheless, on Sunday afternoon.
I'll see you there.
Yes, absolutely. You can catch me on Big Ten Plus. You can catch Noah after the fact with the IDS, and we look forward to that a great deal as we get to that point. Well, we appreciate you all for watching. We appreciate you all for listening. We appreciate all the fun college wrestling that's been going on throughout the past couple weeks, and what there is to look forward to through the next couple weeks. And we will talk to you again next time.